Hello, everyone. Welcome to iStorm's channel and the 16 Days of Activism podcast in support of UN Women UK and fundraising for Safe Spaces Now.
Public spaces need to be safe and inclusive for all now. A report by UN Women UK reveals how common sexual harassment is in the UK. 97% of women my age said they had experienced harassment. Your ideas to support us have already started making a change. At music festivals, with taxi companies, on public transport, in organisations and in online spaces. It's time for a change. Please support Safe Spaces Now by donating to the cause or get involved. You can find the link next to this video. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us in this campaign to create awareness around violence against women and girls. In this episode, we're talking about faith-related violence. My name is Isi Daniels, and I run an organization called Talk with Isi. It's mainly a listening service, and we are focused primarily on promoting mental health awareness and overall well-being. We listen, and we listen, which is very key. We don't make any judgments, and then together we work with individuals to find and identify sustainable ways to support them with their mental health and promote overall well-being. I'm very pleased to have with me today two lovely ladies on this podcast. I have Ola and I have Gbemi, and they'll be sharing their knowledge and expertise on this topic. So I'll let my participants introduce themselves now. So Ola, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Issei. Nice to be here. My name is Oluwagbemisola Ajibawo. I prefer to be called Ola. That's my preferred name. And I'm a domestic violence advocate. I have been advocating for domestic violence since I was about 16 when I got into the university. Currently, I work with an organization, Go Ahead Homes. I work as a family support worker, and I advocate mainly through my social media pages, my LinkedIn and my Twitter page. That's where I mostly advocate and provide support, emotional support for women going through any form of violence. And I make it a point of duty to point them to the correct places where they can get help, which is very, very important. And sometimes they just need to be heard. They just need to be listened to, which is really important and something that I really focus on. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Ola. And my second participant.
Hello, hi. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this. I'm Nikki Dhillon Keane. I'm a therapist and also a trainer and activist. I work specifically at that intersection of domestic abuse, spiritual abuse, trauma and faith. I'm one of the co-founders of the Faith and Violence Against Women Coalition, and I'm the founder of Caritas Safe in Faith. And one of my books is Domestic Abuse in Church Communities. So I'm very happy to join you today.
So you're welcome again, and you can see we have very knowledgeable people, participants that are going to hopefully do justice to this topic. So I'm just going to jump right into our conversation for today, and I'm going to be asking my participants questions, and they will take turns in answering the questions and giving us more insights into this topic that we're handling. So the first question, we're going to start by explaining a bit what faith-related violence means. That's for those who don't know. So Nikki, would you like to explain what faith-related violence means? Thank you.
Sure. It's probably a wider spectrum of behaviors than a lot of people are aware of. I think most people think about things like witchcraft and when spiritual ideas are used to justify harm, particularly to children. It's actually a lot wider than that. And the part that I specialize in is where spiritual abuse is part of domestic abuse. So that would be when faith is weaponized. And certainly if somebody is a victim who is a person of faith, it's actually probably one of the most powerful ways to control them is through weaponizing their faith.
Thank you. And I just want to ask, when you say weaponizing, the first thing that comes to mind is probably what we know as weapons, which are guns, knives. So are we talking about those kind of weapons, or are we also looking at the emotional parts? Because sometimes we talk about violence, but it's not just physical harm to the body. It could be emotional, it could be through words, through action. So when you say weaponized, can you throw some more light on that, please?
Sure, that's a really useful question. It's definitely looking at weaponization in the emotional sense. So I think the best way to describe it is that spiritual abuse is a form of coercive control. If you think of the power and control wheel, and it's got all the different spokes on it, if you're familiar with the Duluth power and control wheel, all the different spokes on that which describe different forms of coercive control, and spiritual abuse, it's not on that wheel, but it's definitely one of those forms of coercive control.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Ola, do you want to give us some insight into that question, please?
Yes, thank you, Ife. Like Nikki said, people usually, even if you make researches on the internet, you most times, no, definitely what you will find is about 90% faith abuse, faith-related abuse is always spoken about child abuse. The information you're going to find is on child abuse, but it's much wider than that, because religion is a very important aspect for most people. It's a background, it's a bedrock for our society. And in religion, we have culture mixed into religion, we have our traditions mixed into religion. So it makes it quite difficult for women most times, especially in terms of emotional abuse, physical abuse, spiritual abuse. For example, most women in religious settings cannot even decide for themselves if they want to give birth or not. There are certain religions that restrict women to how they can go about their sexuality. You can abort, you can have control you can control how you give birth. All of these things in the religious setting, it is normal. On a normal day, it is normal. But there are things that take away from the rights of women every day. There are things that take away from how women are supposed to live their life, from their fundamental human rights. And if you look at it from the religious perspective, it is normal. Abuse has been covered up by religion. Because if you read through the spiritual books, if you read through the culture and the history that's been passed down over time in religion, you come to see that there are various forms of abuse that have now been normalized. If women speak about different forms of abuses, you'd see people look at them and wonder, but that's not a problem. I mean, you hear things like, oh, our mothers have gone through that, or our mothers have always gone through that. And most of the time, faith generally covers up all of these things. And faith-related abuse are the kind of abuse that goes on in communities of faith. And it's important to note that in communities of faith, there is a culture of silence and secrecy where women especially, are not allowed to talk because religion is quite patriarchal and women are not allowed to talk about whatever it is that are going on because it favors the men. The men cannot understand most times what women complain about. When a woman complains about something that has to do with faith-related abuse, most times men cannot understand. They can't see it because they don't go through it. So it looks like they can't wrap their heads around it. Sometimes it's not their fault. It's what has been handed down to us and is what we've been running with. But faith-related abuse can be perpetuated by anybody in the faith community, not necessarily the religious leaders, anybody. It can happen in families, it can happen in between the communities. And unfortunately, most people keep quiet about it for various reasons. They keep quiet about it. I'm sure we're going to get to all that later as we speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. And I just want to add that sometimes, because what I hear from your responses is it can start very subtle, you don't even know what's happening. I mean, because we live in a very diverse place. The UK is very diverse. And you have people from so many cultures, religions, all coming here, but still holding on to those values. So you have families where, they dress in a certain way, or they tell the children you can't date outside our culture, and the children want to experiment and say, oh, I like this person, I want to go out with this person, and then it becomes an issue. So it starts out very subtle, and like you said, it can start from the home, it can start from anywhere, but there has to be that consciousness that women should be allowed to express themselves, how they feel, and to be able to identify when there is abuse, which can lead to violence. So thank you for that. And then the next question, what can you say about faith-related violence against women right now here in the UK? And how bad is it in general? So Ola, I would ask you to respond to that, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to be speaking about faith-related based violence in the UK. I'm going to be speaking from the majority that it affects generally, which is the Black and the minority ethnics. For example, the Asians. If you look at most of them are immigrants. And one thing that immigrants especially hold on to when they go into a new country is their faith. That is one thing that keeps them grounded. It's one thing that keeps them stable. And holding on to all of these things, they bring back their culture and their faith into the country, the UK as we speak. And over time, it affects everything that surrounds them. For example, in a particular religion, a man can marry as much as 4 wives. In the UK, the British recognizes the British Christian marriage. So, for example, if I come into the UK under another faith and we do not have that marriage that is recognized by law, by the courts and by law. So that means if my husband wants to marry other wives, I get to keep quiet. It's an abuse. You find out that most women don't even know that it's an abuse of their fundamental human rights. You're not even allowed to choose your own religion, what you can do, what you want to be. You're right there in the middle of the religion. And if you complain, they're going to say, oh, just keep quiet, just be tolerant. Women are advised to submit, to obey, and to be submissive. Now, when you look at it critically, it gets to a point where you do not know the difference between being abused and being submissive. The lines start to blur. You do not know when you are being abused because you're trying to be tolerant, you're trying to be submissive, you're trying to obey and just not cause any trouble. And at the end of the day, you keep getting lots of abuse piled on you as a woman day in, day out. If you at any point try to make any form of, in fact, it will be difficult for you to make any form of complaint, because from where you're coming from your country, from your religion, you're supposed to keep quiet and endure. Most religions frown on divorce. So you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to leave your marriage. You don't want to be ostracized in the community. You don't want the people that surround you to see you as a bad person. So in the Black and the ethnic minority groups, which is where faith-based abuse is predominantly set in, it's really, really terrible because it's covered up. There are no reports, basically. It's covered up every time. And it's just like, no matter what goes on, even when you speak to people that are victims, I've had times when I spoke to so many people, and when you speak to them, they don't even understand what the violence is about. And because it's been so normalized, they've gone through it, their mothers have gone through it, they've seen other women going through it, it becomes normal. You'd see women who think that if their husbands do not correct them, then they are doing something wrong. After all, it's supported by their spiritual books, it's supported by their spiritual leaders. In the context of translations of spiritual books, a lot of context has been lost, and you find things like you correct your wife, you correct your wife, you correct your partner, and men just take it. People generally take it and run with it and take it to any length that they want. Those terms are so ambiguous that people give it whatever meaning that they wish to, and it just makes the abuse very, very glaring. But unfortunately, people do not see it. So when we talk about faith-based abuse, it's abuse that religion has acted as a covering over. The abuse that people can quote from the religious books over, abuse that has been accepted, that has been normalized under the context of faith, under the context of religion. And over time, it has just become something that everybody is so used to, nobody's saying it. It's eroding people's fundamental human rights. It's eroding people's rights to make decisions, people's right to choose. I tell people that something as simple as getting married and not being allowed to choose your own religion, your own faith, what you want to do, that's an abuse of fundamental human rights. And it's something that faith has acted as a covering over, that faith has normalized. Those are the issues that we talk about when we talk about faith-based abuse and how it is being perpetrated.
Thank you. And Nikki, would you like to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think Ola really described the power that faith-based abuse has to control people, and it happens through all communities. I think it happens differently. It's expressed differently. So in certain cultural groups, it might be expressed as a justification for harmful practices like breast ironing or FGM, but it's to justify that sort of behavior, but it happens across all religions. Some very recent research from Chester University with domestic abuse survivors who identify as Christian found 60% of them had experienced spiritual abuse as part of their experiences. And like Ola said, it's not talked about, it's not recognized. I've been doing this work for over 20 years. And I think a lot of people thought I was bonkers talking about it in the beginning. It is now being more recognized. And in fact, when the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 was passed, myself and some of my colleagues were invited by the Home Office to contribute to the statutory guidance. And there is guidance there now with a statutory definition of spiritual abuse and with some guidance on working with domestic abuse victims and survivors from different faith groups. But there are a lot of things that I think generally the domestic abuse sector doesn't necessarily recognize, and particularly for people where it's not evident that faith is an issue, it often doesn't get recognized. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on that Ola said was about that Christian privilege. I think it is, speaking as someone with Christian background, I think it is a Christian privilege that we're in a Christian marriage that's recognized by law, and you have the protections that come with that. And my colleagues at Jewish Women's Aid have done a lot of work getting recognition for the kind of abuse which is the refusal of a get, which is the religious divorce in the Jewish faith, and that's also the talaq is in Islamic law is the divorce, and all of those things can be used and abused by perpetrators of spiritual abuse.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Very insightful. Very interesting. I'm picking up a lot. So the second question, we have answered it already. It's can you give us examples of cases you've seen or heard? And I know you mentioned FGM. And when you mentioned FGM, I thought of the word violence. And if we go back to the beginning and we talked about weaponizing, we said violence is not just physical harm to the body. And you also said there's some abuse that you can't see. FGM, you can't see it. You don't know it's happened. And it's still happening, mothers are taking their children, to their countries for them to have that done, bringing them back. They don't even know it's a kind of abuse. It's later on in life they realize. So I think that's a very good example. We're going to jump to the next question because time is running fast and this is a very interesting topic. Is there any specific area or demography where this is worse? I know Ola said Black and Asian minority. Would you agree with that, Nikki? Or do you think there's an area where this is worse? When I read the questions, the first thing that came to my mind was, does it have to do with poverty? But the way you're explaining it, I'm getting different, ideas. But Nikki, if you could tell us, about an area, or if you agree with all that is the BAME group that are more at risk of this.
I think it's I always find it difficult to talk about abuse in terms of what's worse, because each individual's experience is their own, and I don't like to get into a comparison. I think it definitely is expressed differently, and in certain cultural groups, and certainly spiritual abuse is used to justify some really horrific, harmful practices in certain cultural groups. It's not, things like FGM, they're not a religious teaching, but religion is weaponized and abused in order to justify it. I actually work with a lot of people who, maybe sort of white Christian, and the form it takes there is that they're pressured perhaps to stay with an abusive partner. They are pressured to forgive, and they might get that pressure from their faith leader, and I've certainly seen evidence of that happening, although I've also seen evidence of faith leaders being amazing and supportive. But it's also something that can be weaponized by the perpetrator of domestic abuse. The perpetrator doesn't even need to share the same faith. They just need to know that's how they can control their victim most effectively. And so things like, you call yourself a Christian, you've got to forgive me, you can't leave, you'll go to hell if you leave, things like that. And obviously we know from research that women with a faith background, any faith background, tend to stay significantly longer in abusive relationships. And obviously the longer you stay, the higher the risk is.
Okay, so from that response, I will pick from Ola and say the BAME group, and then from you, Nikki, those that have held on to some sort of faith, they are more at risk. Okay, so our next question is going to be 2 in 1, and I'll be asking Ola, and if we can keep it brief because our time is far gone. What do you think causes this type of violence, and how do you work to make it safer for women? So Ola.
I think like
Sorry.
Nikki said, it's the weaponizing, it's the indoctrination. That is what causes the faith-abused violence. Because if you are in a particular religion and you've heard over time how things are supposed to work, if it happens to you, you think that is how it's supposed to work. You believe that is how it's supposed to work. You're pressured, just like Nikki said, you're pressured to remain, you're pressured to stay, you're pressured to keep quiet and cover it up. And that is how it extends from person to person. And if you even think about talking, all you're going to hear is, oh, it happened to me. It happened to my mom. We didn't die. It happened to my dad. We didn't die. And that's just what makes it continue and spread its tentacles and its wings. And yeah, sorry, the other question.
The other question is, how do you work to make it safer for women? So we've identified where the problem is and what solution can we propose?
Yeah, so I think that what I do basically is I speak to people, I train people, I speak to people. There was a time where I used to work as a domestic advocate, and back in my home country, and I led lots of projects that had to do with training, especially religious leaders, because you find out that because religious leaders mostly are men, they do not understand where domestic violence is coming from. They do not understand, especially from the side of the woman. So when you explain, they can give you text, they can give you textual, if there's any word like that, advice, but they can't relate with you. They cannot understand what is going on that level. So most times I organize training. Like I said, I provide emotional support to women. I listen. I most times you find out that before people understand what they are going through, they just want people that can listen, people that can hear them. And once you are able to hear them, once you're able to listen, you would be able to point them to the right places to ask for help and to get help from. And I make sure that over time, I make sure that I provide very insightful articles on my social media. I provide insightful write-up on my social media where they can seek help. How I write stories about how people are going through domestic violence and how it can relate to you as a person, just so that people read it. I've had people read some of the stories I've put up and say, oh, this has happened to me. I didn't know that it could happen to, I didn't know it was abuse. And yes, and currently I'm researching on domestic violence in Black and ethnic minority groups. I'm writing a book on it. It's not out yet. I'm currently writing a book, and I trust and I hope that it's going to be really helpful when it's finally done for people that are going through any form of abuse.
Okay, thank you for that response. Nikki, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally echo what Ola was saying, that it's based in power and control. I think it's really important to make clear that it's not necessarily faith itself that's the problem. It's how it's a twisted form of faith that's been weaponized in order to control and subjugate people. One of the things I do is make sure that people are aware that actual Catholic canon law, I do a lot of work with the Catholic Church, Catholic canon law says leave. If you're in danger, leave. You can leave. And most people don't know that. Even a lot of clergy don't know that. And again, I would echo what Ola was saying, that, one of the things that we do is at Safe in Faith is educating clergy. And I've come across some amazing priests and sisters who do phenomenal work, but the knowledge isn't out there, and it's not there for everybody. And that's really the most basic thing we can do, is educate clergy. We're also I'm training an interfaith group of counsellors and psychotherapists to be able to work in faith literate ways, and provide that support where there's the confidence to address and unpick spiritual abuse. Because I think a lot of time in secular services, there's a tendency to be a little bit afraid of addressing those subjects because they're very sensitive. So that's the other sort of the other arm of what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So what I got from that was information. We need all the information out there so people can access it. We live in an age where, there's information everywhere, TV, social media. So we need to find, places that we can work with. And I think that's the beauty of what UN Women is doing, creating safe spaces for people to tell their stories, because by the time people share what they are going through, you find out, oh, this is not just me going through this, there's other people going through that I can speak to. So we are going to round up now. And for closing remarks or closing notes, I would just ask you, how can people reach out to you if they want to connect, or where can people find more information about this? So just answer one of those questions, and you just have a minute, please. So Ola, how can people reach out to you, or where can they find out more information about this topic we're discussing?
People can reach out to me through my LinkedIn profile, Oluwagbemisola Ajibawo. It's a mouthful, I know. And most times information can be found online. There's so many places. So just to make it short, information can be found online.
Okay, thank you. Nikki, how can people reach out to you if they want to connect, and where can they find more information about this?
So they can reach out through our website, which is Safe in Faith, and there's an email address there people can use. And we actually have on the website, we have links to a lot of resources and organizations like Sikh Women's Aid, Jewish Women's Aid, Restored UK, where people can find more information.
Okay. Thank you so much, beautiful ladies, for an insightful conversation. So this will be the end of this podcast, but the 16 days of activism still continues. So stay glued to the remaining topics that will be discussed, because they are going to be very interesting. And once again, it's all about creating safe spaces, supporting women, working with the men, because they are very important too, working with the men to make sure everyone is, is safe, everyone is happy, and that equality factor is there. So thank you so much once again, and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget to donate to Safe Spaces now, link next to the video.